Why do we play games? Is it because we want to escape reality for a moment, or because we crave something new, something we can't experience in real life? Whatever the answer may be, a game cannot exist without a story. Whether it's a sandbox like Minecraft or The Sims, or your favorite MOBA, stories and game mechanics are what makes games truly remarkable. What makes good storytelling in video games? There are so many more ways to convey a story in games than in books, like game mechanics, level design, quest design, cutscenes, play agency, and much more. So, how do we make all of that feel coherent so the player can truly travel through a meaningful story? Today, we are talking about storytelling in video games, particularly the three pillars of game writing. But before we start, greetings, stranger. My name is Katie. I'm a writer and a narrative game designer. So here we talk about fantasy, books, games, world building. So if you're interested, you're welcome here. So there are three pillars of game writing: plot, character, and lore. You might say, wait, isn't that the same as in book writing? What's the difference? And unlike in books, you don't have to focus on all three pillars in the game at the same time. When writing for video games, you must remember that it's not only about the text. You convey story through mechanics, environment, and player agency. The truth is, if you try to focus on all three pillars equally at once, none of them will shine. That's something I learned from my own experience as a developer, and I've also heard the same from colleagues in the industry. When I mention titles like The Elder Scrolls, The Last of Us, or The God of War, what comes to mind? Elder Scrolls is beloved for its atmosphere, deep lore, and a world that has mesmerized players for decades. The Last of Us delivers a poignant story about lost survival and two strangers who discover a bond they never expected. In the God of War series, well, let's be honest, Kratos originally was a true anti-hero, like ruthless, violent, even barbaric. But in God of War in 2018, the Ragnarok, he's forced to face the consequences of his past choices and grow into a better man. As you can see, each of these games excels in one particular pillar, and that's why it makes this game standing out in their genres. That doesn't mean the other two pillars don't matter, they're still important, but when you choose one to truly focus on, that's where your game can become exceptional. So now that the bigger picture is covered, let's break down each pillar one by one. So plot is what the story is about, a series of interconnected events, the bits that form the canvas of the narration. There are two main types of plot, like linear and non-linear. A linear plot is structured in a defined order. Practically, this means the player goes from point A to point B, then to point C, and so on and so forth. So, usually, stories like this have one or two predetermined endings. Good examples here are God of War Ragnarok or like Portal. Linear stories are considered much simpler to write and design, but here comes the trick. A lot of new developers think that linear storytelling will ruin their game. Like, what about player agency? Like, I want to give players freedom, and of course, it depends on the type of game you're creating. What is the purpose of your narrative? Because, like, remember, narrative should support your game mechanics. That's important. Take Little Misfortune, It Takes Two, or Lost in Play. These games don't need non-linear or like branching narratives because the stories they tell are already complete. One of the benefits of linear storytelling is clear progression. When the player performs action A, they receive a specific narrative or visual result. However, for some players, a linear story might feel boring or give the impression that their choices don't really matter. On the other hand, we have a nonlinear narrative where the player can go from the starting point to A or B or maybe C. Here we give the player the choice to shape their experience and decide the order of the events. Some examples include like Hollow Knight, for example, Valheim, and honestly, almost every AAA RPG. So this approach gives players more agency and creates the illusion of control. Though, of course, there are still key events in the story that the player must reach. Yes or yes. So, what matters is how they get there. Nonlinear narrative is much harder to write. One of the challenges I've seen while working with different writers is that those without deep gaming experience, especially those who mostly wrote for cinema or books, they tend to think linearly. It's difficult to structure a story where events A, B, and C can happen in any order without breaking the logic of the Ake narrative. Branching narrative is essentially a nonlinear structure but taken to a much more complex level. Each choice the player makes leads them onto a specific path, opening new events and consequences. You can replay the game multiple times, and each run may feel different. A great example is Detroit Become Human. We can give players 100% freedom, but branching narrative gets closer to that feeling of like truly choosing what happened. However, not every game can afford this approach. Development time and cost are often too high unless you have like a large narrative team. Now let's talk about narrative in open world games. You may think that if it is an open world, players can go anywhere and do anything, which is true in theory, but as game designers, we don't want total chaos, right? So we still want to guide players through the story. Without any guidance, players may lose the thread of the events. So how do we guide them without actually restricting them? There are several ways. Place enemies who are much stronger than the player early on. Let players discover objects they can't interact with yet because they lack of skills, items, or experience. Like, for example, in Horizon Forbidden West, Aloy can discover metal flowers early, but can only open them later with a specific gear. These limitations also support the sense of progress. When players finally overcome a challenge, it creates that satisfying, like, yes, I earned this. Sandbox and narratives, how do they relate? You might think that sandboxes have no narrative at all, and partially that is true. There is no predetermined plot or set storyline, but sandboxes, they give players the tools to create their own adventure. Maybe you want to explore deep mines or build your dream farmhouse, so go for it. Or maybe you're playing The Sims and crafting a whole family drama. As a developer, your job is to give players the tools to tell stories of their own. The second pillar is the character, or more specifically, the protagonist. Here, we won't talk about NPCs or minor characters, but focus on the main character. There are two major types of protagonists in games, like the silent or blank slate character and the traditional protagonist. So silent characters. This type of protagonist was extremely popular in early RPGs. Like a silent protagonist doesn't have a pre-established background or personality, which allows players to project themselves into the role and shape their own character. Players can often customize their like physical appearance as well. Usually, silent characters don't have voiced dialogue, though there are exceptions, like in Gothic. They might still have some minor sounds, such as like grunts when jumping, like taking damage, dying, and like sometimes even short predetermined lines like these boats have seen everything. From production standpoint, this type of character is cheaper to create because there is like there is no need to fully voice acting this character, and that can cost a lot. In first-person games, there is no need for facial animation, which also reduces development time. This also can apply, by the way, to some traditional protagonists. So some silent characters can be fully customized, like in Baldur's Gate 3, for example, or The Elder Scrolls. Others cannot, for example, the protagonist in Gothic, Hollow Knight, or Samus in Metroid. Traditional protagonists work similarly to characters in books. We define their motivation, background, personality, and personal arcs. So the key difference from silent characters is that here we as writers must show who the character is and make players care about them, not always, but usually traditional protagonists are fully voiced, which again increases production cost and time. Choosing the right approach depends on the story you want to tell. Both types have their strengths. What matters most is how the players connect to their role. And that brings us to the next topic, player agency. So, what is player agency? It's one of the most important concepts in game design, the degree of freedom we give players to shape their own experience. It's about time, place, and resources, the tools we as developers provide so players can discover their own path. These decisions should matter, or at least feel like they matter. It's not just like a cosmetic choice like red gun or green gun. It's more like will you slay the dragon and save the princess, or lure him into a deadly trap where he dies painfully? Well, I don't know why that example came to my mind, but anyways, player agency is crucial because it directly affects player engagement and satisfaction. The core elements of player agency are foreseeability. Can the player predict the consequences of their actions? Ability. Does the player actually have the means to make this outcome happen? Desirability. Does the player want this outcome? And connection. Do the results feel connected to the player's choices? The third pillar of storytelling is lore. This is especially important in fantasy and sci-fi genres where we must show players a universe different from our own. Even if the world seems similar to reality, it still has unique features, and our job is to reveal those elements organically. I already have a video on world building where I share some tips on creating your universe, so here we will focus more on how lore works specifically in games. The key is that your lore shouldn't exist in a vacuum. It must support multiple elements of the game, mechanics, level design, character design, and so on and so forth. So your world should not only be consistent and rich with depth, it should also invite interactions. This includes side quests, like, by the way, check out my video on those, and of course, environmental storytelling. Environmental storytelling is one of the most effective ways to convey narrative in games. Remember, nobody likes giant walls of text in games. Not even the most dedicated lore nerds want to read 5 pages about why a rebellion happened in ancient era of the forgotten something. Environmental storytelling uses audiovisual elements to communicate the world's history and mood. Color palette, ambient music and sound, props and details in the level that hint at the world's state. It can also include scattered notes, letters, and books. For example, much of the story in Dark Souls 3 is discovered through items description and environmental clues. The same is true for the Resident Evil series, where we uncover not only what caused this disaster, but also personal experiences like messages, reports, desperate notes, which make the world feel more real and lived in. Most games focus on one of the three storytelling pillars, but that doesn't mean you can ignore the others. All three matter, even if one takes the spotlight. And that's it for today. So if you like this video, please like it, comment, share your thoughts on the topic, and well, see you in the next one. Bye.